André Boisclair is a well-known political leader from Montreal, a former member of the National Assembly, a former leader of the Parti québécois, and you were appointed by Premier Pauline Marois to Quebec's Delegate General of New York position, and that was back in December.
That's it.
So you've been on the job for about 6, 7, 8 months now. Welcome.
Yep. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be. It's a pleasure to be with you.
As Quebec's top diplomat in New York, I imagine trade and border security must be two of your biggest priorities.
Yep.
We know that New York and Quebec are each other's top trading partner. How important is that trade to Quebec?
Well, it is very important. When you look at the numbers, every year it's more than $7.8 billion of goods and services that do cross the border in both directions. So it's an important market. The Quebec economy is very open. More than 50% of our GDP is exportation, 70% of these exports to the United States, and the most important state is New York State. And I think that both the people and the policymakers in Quebec and in New York understand the fact that we really around Montreal form a region, and that we all have a same common objective to make the border as safe as possible, that's for sure, but to make the border as thin as possible for more people to be able to move freely on both sides of the borders, and for good also to move as rapidly as possible.
Both tourists and goods.
Of course, yeah.
Tourism is huge, obviously, for Quebec as it is for New York.
Tourism is a huge thing. Getting some traction in the international market is a challenge, and I think that here again, Quebecers and New Yorkers are facing the same kind of challenge. A lot of people go down in New York City. The governor has a lot of policy. He'd like to have more people coming in upper state. Same thing in Montreal. So we have to capture the attention of international tourists to put Montreal on their agenda. But once they're in Montreal, we'd like them to go in Quebec City, in Chicoutimi, in Gaspé, aux Îles-de-la-Madeleine, all very nice places. So we're actually facing the same kind of issues.
And with the loonie and dollar pretty much on par for the past few years now,
yeah.
There's incentive on both sides of the border to try to boost tourism, to try to get them to come to visit your province and to come to the States.
That's it, and so the dollar has been almost at par for the past months. What we're seeing now as a new trend is that maybe the dollar will go to 95 cents, a little bit under par, which is to a certain point good for Quebec exporters. So I think that the federal policy right now the federal government is introducing some policies, and they want to boost trade. The economy of Quebec is doing well. We weren't as hit hard as you were in the United States, but still the economy, the level of growth is around 3-4%, unemployment is around 8%, a bit the same numbers that you guys have here in New York. So we'd like to boost our economy, and one of the ways to do it is to support Quebec companies that do want to have access to international markets, and obviously all the states in the Mid-Atlantic. Everything that happened also on the East Coast is important for us.
So it's not just New York that's interested in Quebec. A number of states are probably looking to try to attract you and your companies.
Yeah, and Quebecers, obviously, we are big free traders. We believe in competition, and we try to, we have some world class industries, like Bombardier is playing a great role, Novabus, well known to people in Plattsburgh. Cascade, a very good player, CGI. So these, world-class companies are playing in the U.S. markets, and also they're looking at the different opportunity that the U.S. market has to offer. So New York is interesting because it's very close to Montreal. It's not even an hour ride from Montreal to Plattsburgh. But people are looking also at what kind of fiscal environment in which they can play in the States. Texas, more and more, is on our radar. The new initiative from the governor, who just introduced this program to jumpstart the economy, introduce these important tax breaks, is also on the radar of Quebec companies. So we're having this conversation between policymakers to see, obviously there's a border, but if we agree that we are part of the same economic regions, that our supply chain are very well integrated, how can we work together to attract more international investors? When you think about it, Volvo owns Novabus. Novabus head office in Montreal. The engineering is done in Montreal, and some of the manufacturing is done in Plattsburgh. But the starting point of the conversation, there's Volvo, who's a European corporation. So how can we get more Volvo to invest in Montreal and from Montreal get an access to the US market? That I think is the vision that we have in common with the policymakers in Albany.
And we're seeing signs of that on this side of the border. Nova Bus has been here about 3 or 4 years now. Bombardier, Nova Bus doing incredibly well. The transportation industry here is booming in Clinton County, but you mentioned about them expanding and potentially bringing in other business. Prevost,
Prevost just got a contract.
Parent company, getting a contract here, $165 million. If they get approval to build onto the Nova Bus plant, which it appears they certainly will do. So, as you say, their parent companies and other companies are looking beyond the companies that are just here.
And not only in Clinton County, if I may, and some other parts of the state also, close to Rochester, Alstom is a very, very big player. And Alstom will be building the engines for the Montreal Metro. Alstom recently won a contract to introduce their tram technology in Ottawa. That's obviously in Ontario, the neighboring province. But it will have an impact on the jobs created in New York State. And actually, in the coming weeks, I will be bringing some Quebec companies to meet with Alstom. Alstom wants to diversify their supply chain. So there's opportunities for entrepreneurs who want to play a more active role in this transportation sector. And I think that you will rapidly agree with me that we really have, with Montreal, Plattsburgh, Quebec, and New York, a very important transportation hub. Can you imagine if Laurentian were to come to Plattsburgh too? That would add to the level of expertise. That means more people that are trained, that can be add value to a corporation who's involved in this industry. So I think that's the future is kind of very exciting.
Laurentian is one of those projects that people here have been keeping their fingers crossed for years now. Many aren't optimistic it's going to happen. Do you think it's still?
Well, that would be for me to ask you the question, and for your viewers to answer. But obviously, no, we're looking at the same reports in the media. I'm not directly, of course, not active in this conversation, but. I believe that the stronger the Plattsburgh region is, the stronger the Montreal region will be. And the stronger Montreal will be, stronger Plattsburgh will be. So I don't see, we're obviously competitors in some field, and that's good, and may the best win. But if we can attract a pool of assets, a pool of intelligent people who can add value to the economy, a pool of people who are strong, creative, innovators, well, that adds value to our economy. And I think that one of the key challenges for us is to make sure that our education system is even more performant. We're blessed in Montreal to have McGill University, Concordia, University of Montreal, and Quebec City. So great institutions that add to the international brand of Montreal, but that add a lot of expertise and knowledge in the market, and that I think is the way for the future.
Are you hearing from companies in Quebec, as New York is hearing from employers here, that they need the colleges and universities to train workers for these jobs of today, for the transportation jobs at Bombardier and Nova Bus, for these more specific manufacturing jobs, and that they're actually having trouble finding qualified workers for a number of these jobs. They need these workers trained.
We're having the same kind of problems in Montreal. So there's two challenges here. The first one is to make sure that our education system is a bit more entrepreneurial, that we go and seek the opportunities, and do that with respect with the fundamental mission of might it be a CEGEP or a university, and so that's an ongoing conversation. But for sure, in certain sectors in the Quebec economy, we are missing jobs. And we are missing people to fill in jobs that are today available. So training is the key, and this is what the focus of the Quebec government right now is, to make sure that we are able to meet these demands from the private sector, but to do it not only to make sure that by the education that is provided to the younger generation, that we make these people creative, that they add real value to the job market, and that they are very, we need as fantastic PhDs, but we need also fantastic technician. And it's we need the technician as much as we need the PhD. And that's a challenge for Quebec to adapt. We have a very good university system, but our technical schools are still undergoing some challenges. Some people would say, it's not as glamorous to be a good technician than to have a PhD. Well, I disagree. We need both. We need the PhDs and we need the good technicians.
And the same thing New York is facing.
Of
very
course.
much.
Yep.
You have great natural resources in Canada. You
Yes.
have hydropower. And
Yeah.
is that one area where you see trade expanding in the coming years? Are you hoping to export more hydropower to New York and the Northeast and the United States?
We're always looking for new markets. Obviously, what we have to offer, and that is what makes Quebec so unique, we offer clean, renewable energy. And there's been a lot of conversation on climate change, Sandy, how do we adapt, and it's a reality, and we need to make the good choices today for the coming years. I think that hydroelectricity is part of the solution. Wind is exceptional, solar is very good, but windmill produces electricity only when it's windy. Mm-hmm. So we need a kind of a base, and hydroelectricity with wind or with solar is a fantastic solution. The question is, how can we move this electricity from Quebec to the United States when we know that all kind of difficulties with the grid. The grid is full. It's a very complex task today to move this electricity from Quebec to the south. So we're right now actually considering a project that has been permitted by the New York State government to build an underground cable from Montreal to Astoria, New York. A DC line, that means a direct line, underground to bring 1,000 megawatt to New York City, where the market is good. We all know that the governor has said many times that he would like to close Indian Point. So that's 2,000 megawatt that would go out. So I think that Quebecers should be seen here as part of the solution. We are, in a certain way, solution providers for New Yorkers who are looking to have access to more clean, renewable energy.
And you're talking about the Champlain Hudson Power Express line
That's it.
Going through the regulatory process, but it's cleared several major hurdles.
Yep.
The hope is that by 2015, about 1,000 megawatts of power will be going from the Montreal area to New York City.
2017, the regulatory process should be completed by this year, because over and above the state approval, we need a federal permit, a presidential permit, because it's a project that crosses the border. So with the U.S. Constitution, the provision in the U.S. Constitution, we need this presidential permit. So TDI, which is not a Quebec corporation, it's a Canadian corporation, head office in Ontario. Yes. That's an interesting model. Blackstone brings the money, a Canadian corporation, which is in Ontario, and Hydro-Quebec, who will be under contract with TDI, and will have access to 75% of the capacity of the cable. So Hydro-Quebec is buying capacity and will be selling electricity through this new line. So that's an interesting model also. It's not only Quebecers selling electricity to New Yorkers. It's a U.S. very well-known global Blackstone U.S. interest, and so U.S. money in the project, and I'm sure that Blackstone expect a great return on this investment.
There hasn't been a large outcry of opposition to this.
No.
For many people, the giant power lines coming across the border are a turnoff, and that's held up a number of projects, like one from Quebec down into New England and down through New Hampshire. This is a way to get the power out of sight, a reliable source. Do you see this as a potential way, lines like this, to get more power from Quebec to other parts of the Northeast and the United States?
So the technology does exist. So it's feasible. However, we need to be also able to supply. So we are in deregulated markets. And if you think at the strategic position of Hydro-Quebec, when you look at in the global North American market, what are our huge reservoirs? If you think about it, they're kind of batteries. At night, we can close the dams, import energy that is produced in Ontario in a nuclear plant, and buy it at a very good price. And when the demand is more important, we open the dams and we produce electricity. So we obviously, Hydro-Quebec is in a certain way a bit opportunistic. They're looking at the good markets where they have the most important returns, and we're trying to manage our resources in the most efficient way. The Quebec government also recently took the decision to close our only nuclear plant in Quebec. So that was around 700 megawatts. It's the Gentilly plant, not too far from Montreal, the south shore of the Saint Laurent. So that is also a new reality that we have to adapt in our service offering to international and to the U.S. and Ontario markets.
And as you mentioned, if New York closes Indian Point, its nuclear plants, then obviously it will have to look for that power in other sources.
Yep.
New York City, metropolitan New York, desperate for power. New England, desperate for power.
Yep.
How much power do you think you could supply in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, the question is at what price? So, you know, that remains the same question.
But at a price that's much more affordable than many other options for New York and other New England states.
However, and we have to be, be very transparent about it, there's a new big player, and how could I say, the elephant in the room is natural gas. Pennsylvania has been producing so much. The markets are so good, and when you look at it on the consumer side,
right.
Might it be for the companies involved in manufacturing or for the individuals buying electricity, the price of electricity produced with natural gas is very low because the price of natural gas is very, very low. So I'd say that it's a more competitive market than what it used to be before the shale gas revolution. So we feel the impact of it, and it's clear that, you know, if we are to build new projects in Canada, and particularly if there's new projects that are built in Quebec, well, we have to make sure that the return on the investment is a good return. So it all depends on the price and where the markets will go.
New York State hasn't decided on hydrofracking, still trying to decide. Yeah. Exactly. That continues, trying to come up with regulations, trying to decide whether to approve it. Is it allowed in Quebec? There is hydrofracking. It's been banned. There's a moratorium there as well.
So there's a kind of, everybody was looking at this, is waiting for the report of the EPA. And even though, you know, we're neighbors, but we're obviously, I think that the study from the EPA will have an impact on the future of the industry. A few months after the governor here had decided of a moratorium, there was a moratorium imposed in Quebec. And a few months after it was imposed in Quebec, it was imposed in France. So, you know, we're neighbors, and it shows in the way that the information flows between us. So it's no surprise for me that this moratorium was imposed in Quebec a few months after it was imposed in New York. We're waiting for the decision of the governor, but it's clear that different stakeholders have a lot of questions about fracking. And I think that both policymakers, might it be in Quebec or in New York, will want to bring more answers to the legitimate questions of the people. So there's a real moratorium in force right now in Quebec.
And speaking of being neighbors and dealing with energy issues, obviously your province dealing with the disaster in Lac-Mégantic, terrible tragedy about a month ago, the runaway train that exploded, killing 47 people. That has obviously had a huge impact on your province.
Yeah, no, I think that the first thing I'd like to say is thank you to all these New Yorkers that came to me and wrote me letters and notes, and people that wanted to extend their sympathies to the families of the victim. It's a tragedy. I think also that it was preventable, and we're looking at all the consequences of this incident. So I think that first and foremost, it's a tragedy for the families, it's a tragedy for the community, and I think that the Quebec government is doing whatever we can to support these communities and the families that were impacted. That being said, it's clear also that we are all learning in the process, and I think that not that too many people in Lac-Mégantic knew how dangerous these projects transported by rail. Actually, it was oil that was coming from North Dakota, moving to New Brunswick, to the Irving refinery. So, you know, people know where the railroads are. People see the trains, and they feel the vibration, they see it in the community. But not many people were asking questions on what's in these containers, and how dangerous might it be, and what kind of surveillance, and what are the rules. So we're all learning, and I think that it's a rude awakening When you're a citizen of Lac-Mégantic and suddenly you realize that this train was left there with no surveillance, it's common sense saying that when you have toxic products and, there should be someone there. So we are pressuring, the Quebec government is pressuring the federal government of Canada, which is, as in the States, responsible of regulation, safety regulation of this kind of industry. And we're initiating a conversation with the industry. And I think that the inquiry that is going on right now, they will have some very important recommendations. But already we know that some people in the industry were ringing the bell a few months back. We learned, for example, that Enbridge, which owns pipelines, was moving oil. So we just learned recently that Enbridge had called on the U.S. regulator, saying that this oil coming from North Dakota was maybe more flammable because it contained more chemicals than traditional oil. And this is why this is maybe one of the reasons why it was such an important explosion, because usually oil is not that flammable. It doesn't explode the way it did in Lac-Mégantic. So even the people in industry right now are asking questions. So when you see people in the industry debating these kinds of issues, it's no surprise for me that Senator Schulman from New York recently sent a press release and asking the federal regulator to make sure that these old cars, the ones we call the DOT 111, be removed from the tracks. He argues that they're not appropriate, they're not secure enough. So it will have an impact on the U.S. regulation too.
And do you think people had any idea the amount of oil that's going from the Dakotas and Alberta on railroads now? Just the massive amounts of oil, of crude that are being transported by rail. I
think that people were aware of the importance of the amount, so that there was a lot going on. What they didn't know, though, is how much the augmentation of the past years is amazing. So the volumes are high, but the percentage increase of the volume in the past years is, it's skyrocketing. It's exponential.
Do you think it's going to bolster the argument for pipelines like the Keystone coming into the States, or even converting existing pipelines like the one between Montreal and Portland, Maine, to carry crude oil?
Well, that's part of the conversation, and there's different views. Obviously, when there's an incident with a train, it's very it's always a tragedy, and it's huge fires and it's huge explosions. So, but with a pipeline, some people say, the volumes can be very, very high, and obviously need not to explode to have an impact on local communities, on watersheds. So that's part of the conversation. What I understand from the reports I've been reading is that I think that the demonstration has been made that it's safer by pipeline than by train, but still it's part of the conversation, and all the policymakers involved in this conversation will have to take everything into account. But the fact is, we're still using a lot of oil. We'd like to use less, and oil will go to markets. So I think that the question that we're trying to figure out is, how can we all be more independent towards oil? How can we bring more renewables? And that's a very important part of the equation. You have very high RPS standards here in New York State. So around these questions, I think that the policymakers will have to take some very courageous decisions. That's the kind of challenges that the Quebec government is up to, is ready to take right now.
Border security, obviously important. As we saw with the foiling of that plot with the Via Rail train, we're not really sure if it was going to happen on the Canadian side or on the New York side. Border security, the northern border is still an issue. New York has invested millions in improving the border crossing at Champlain. Federal government. Quebec, just this past year, saying it's going to spend $47 million à Lacolle, right on at the same location. So critical that the borders be upgraded. Is there a continuous push, though, for more cooperation, even shared border crossings, to save money, as you not only look at improving the technology, but possibly working together in more cases to share facilities?
We need to do that. So the concept is very simple: as safe as possible, but as thin as possible. But when you think about it, the border is only one of the challenge. I think that what we need to do is to increase security at the point of entry. So, for example, if a container arrives in the port of Montreal, it could be scanned and verify the content from the port of Montreal, and from the port flow wherever south of the border. So we need to concentrate some efforts at the point of entry. And ports are key, airports are key. So the more we can put the focus on who comes in on the continent, the easier the flow of goods, capital, goods and person will be on both sides of the border. I think that is the challenge between both governments right now.
And where you talk about point of entry,
yeah.
A number of people in New York would like to see customs agents allowed at Central Station in Montreal so that inspections can be done there to speed up traffic across the border.
And for sure, you know, Amtrak is pushing for it because that would make their business case would even be better. I recently took the train, and you know, as everybody in the train, you know, I had to wait 2 hours at the border and wasn't very happy about it. But still, there were 5 agents there. So these guys at Canadian Border are doing their job. But sometimes, you know, issues with 1 or 2 passengers, and the train cannot leave if not all of the passengers have been cleared. So that is, if we could do pre-clearance in Montreal before we take the train, so that would be a challenge. However, we know very well that DHS is under pressure, financial pressure, so there's a real financial constraint there. We need a legal framework to make that happen, and the legal framework right now is not clear. And also, how can we make sure that the train, once it leaves Montreal, that it remains secure? That you cannot get on board, or because the train doesn't go very rapid. It's not very rapid between Montreal and the border. So these are kind of questions that do remain. There's some technical answers that needs to be given to this fight, but for sure, if we could have not only, you know, pre-clearance boarding in Montreal, but also simple things that we want to discuss with Amtrak, you know. Why not some, you know, if it would be so fun and enjoyable for Montrealers to be able to hop on the train with their bikes and come to do some biking in the Adirondacks and vice versa. So these are also the kind of concerns. We want to make it, you know, as efficient as possible, but also, if I may say, with the Quebec accent, make it as enjoyable as possible and meet as much needs as expressed by our population.
For more than a decade, there have been summits between New York and Quebec, talking about the corridor between Montreal, the North Country, Albany, New York City, improving trade. High technology, biotech have been goals and talked about for a number of years. After the recession now, how close are we to those original goals, or are we looking at new and different goals?
The goals are the same. Try to create jobs as much as possible on both sides of the borders, do whatever is needed to assure that our economy is competitive, that we promote the region, north and south of the border, to attract more international investment. So this conversation is the objective remain the same. Is the summit the solution? Well, it can be part of the solution, but I think that the Quebec government right now believes in a bottom-up approach. And so what I'm working right now to do is to grow the relationship between business organizations. Ed Brissetti, the president of the New York Business Council, was recently in Montreal to address the business community. Françoise Bertrand, the president of the Quebec Federation of Chamber of Commerce, was in Albany a few weeks back to meet her vis-a-vis in Albany and see how can they grow this relationship. And I think that we have a lot of attraction in the governor's office, who's obviously very interested in what's happening between Quebec and New York. And let's see, you know, if the timing is right, I'd be very happy to have this conversation at the premier and governor's level. But I think that as the governor, the premier of Quebec is focused on results. And if we sit around the same table, it's because there are things that we need to achieve. And right now, you know, there hasn't been this summit, but there's been a lot of action. Bombardier expanding. There's another few good news. Cascade should have an announcement soon. It's popping in the media here and there.
Large paper company.
That's it, yeah. So there's a lot of things happening. I think that that's a good strategy. Focus on results. And that is where the Premier of Quebec, Mrs. Marois, is going. And as I understand it, that's also where the governor is going. So these two should get along well.
Andre Boisclair, Quebec Delegate General, thank you very much for taking the time.
It's been a pleasure.
Nice having you.
Pleasure.